So it's good. Yeah. Let me have your attention, please. My name is John Schaefer. I'm a Woodland Park City Councilman. And I was recently looking for some demographic data and realized it was old. And I was looking at Elizabeth's presentation that she made here 2.5 years ago, September of 2012. And so she and I communicated and decided it was time for her to come back to Woodland Park and tell us what's happening today and look at the forecasts for out at least 10 years, probably longer if you like. And so before Elizabeth begins, however, I'd like to quickly go through the audience, have us tell us your name, who you are, why you're here, and if you're representing an organization, nonprofit or profit, let us know. So if we can do that in quick order, I'd appreciate it. And let's start back in this corner with city staff.
Parks and Recreation Director, just here to learn more information.
Okay. Jessica?
Member, Deputy City Clerk for the city, just here to get information about the city. Laura Pellegrino, City Planner.
Okay.
Suzanne LeClaire, City Clerk. Carol Lincoln, Office of Economic Development.
Brian Flair, Office of Economic Development, Downtown Development.
Okay. Dave?
David Burgess, permit technician, planning and building department.
Okay, how about you folks standing in the back?
Oh, I'm Dan Taylor, I own car washes.
Okay.
I'm David Buttery with the City of Woodland Park.
Jeff Johnson with Goodwill.
Back corner? The lady in blue or purple?
I'm Jan McCamey. I coordinate the victim assistance program for all of Teller County.
All right.
Alan Warren, Huntington Teller County Coroner. No, I'm not going for business.
Okay. Carolyn Smith, Youth Pass Symphony Guild.
Nick and Glenda Adams, fairly new residents, just inquisitive.
All right. Good.
Doug Gillum, new resident, just inquisitive.
All right. Okay. All right.
Caperton, Habitat for Humanity.
Mike Brady, owner of Brady and Associates, a local PR firm.
Eric Griggle, Pikes Peak Regional Hospital.
Terry Buckner, I'm the CEO of the hospital.
Okay.
Kurt Brenner, community organizer.
I'm Sarah Carlson. I'm the grants manager at Community Partnership Human Resource Center.
Kathy Good, just curious.
Walter and Yolanda Miranda, Coalition for Housing.
Okay.
I'm Mary Steinmeiser, I'm the director of the Teller County Regional Mental Health. Cindy Gannon, I'm just a resident, just interested.
All right.
Nancy Lucky, RE2, Board of Education, and parent, resident.
I'm Brian Gustafson, Director of Business Services for the Woodland Park School District.
Brian Johnson, K Enterprises.
Brooke Smith, resident. Brad Spivey, Park State Bank and Trust.
I'm Tom Lindenberg, also a resident, going on 9 years this September.
Dave Sapp here unofficially, just to collect some information, may be helpful for our church.
Okay.
Vicki Sapp, just interested.
Barbara Berger, Teller Senior Coalition, very interested. Janet Brown, Teller Senior Coalition.
Michael Faber, DDA and Joni's Restaurant.
Dale Schnitker, Vector Bank. North State Teller County Commissioner.
Carol Holcomb, Rampart Range Library District. Carol Thomas, Rampart Range Library District.
And Sandy King, Rampart Range District.
Okay.
Ron Moore, resident. Jerry Penland, Planning Commission.
Alec is our president.
Mary Jo Larson, the cow hand, and the DDA, and we're celebrating our 50th year of business.
Good.
Have y'all at a career newspaper.
Okay.
Sally Riley, Planning Director.
Watson, Planning Commissioner, and Health and Eating Board Member.
Well, thank you all very much. Thank you for coming today, too. Our presenter today is the State Demographer. She's been in the job for 11 years. She is considered the demographic expert in the state. She didn't ask me to say that, but that's true. We're pleased to see you all, and Elizabeth has agreed that she's willing to take questions throughout her presentation. So if you have a question, please get her attention, and she will answer it for you. And so with that, I introduce Elizabeth Garner.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
having me. I am so impressed. This is a great turnout. And it was a beautiful afternoon to drive here, so kudos to you guys for that as well. Last time I think I was here in September, and it was a beautiful snowstorm. So thanks for accommodating me. I appreciate it. I want you guys to know that I want this to be a conversation. Obviously, I'm going to share a lot of data and information about Teller County and Woodland Park, but I also want you to ask questions. I report on publicly available data, and we're all in agreement that it's not always 100% right. So if you have questions, if you have doubts, definitely let me know, because our goal in our office, we're in the Department of Local Affairs, is to create data and information to improve local decision making. So if it isn't right, it doesn't really help to improve local decision making. So with that, I'm going to start, but I want to encourage this as a conversation and not just a one-day event. Feel free to keep in touch with me, send me data and information, ask questions, whatever. And we'll make sure also that this presentation is available for everyone and anyone, whoever might need it afterwards. All right, so I think I just did this piece. I talked about myself. We are a state agency in the Department of Local Affairs. We are a public information office, and we are a public outreach office. So again, the goal behind our office is to produce data and information available for local decision making. And there's 3 chairs in the front row for those of you that want to sit there, if you'd like. So think of us as a resource if you need it with whatever you might be doing. I always think it's important to start with the big picture so that we'll know where Woodland Park and Teller fit into Colorado and to the U.S. as a whole. So big picture, the U.S. population between 13 and 14 increased by about 2.1 million to reach 318 million, or, and this is the most important piece, increasing at about 0.7%. Colorado at the same time reached about 5.3 million, and this is the stunning part. 4th fastest in terms of percentage change, increasing by 1.6%. Now, quick math, 1.6 is double the 0.7, so we're growing at about twice the rate that the U.S. is. Behind some pretty fast-growing states, and then 8th in absolute change. We increased by 83,000 people between 2013 and 2014. The previous year, we were the 4th fastest growing state in absolute terms, increasing by 78,000. So what that means real quick is that there's some other states that are starting to pick up momentum and pick up growth. But it's important to know where Colorado fits into the U.S. picture. But within the state as a whole, we had some counties increasing by 15,000 and other counties declining by 400. Any guesses? Who increased by 15,000? Denver. Okay. Who declined by 400? No. It's another D county. Delta. So we've got a pretty big spectrum within the state. And if we look at the total population by county for the state, between 2010 and 2014, all of the red, orange, yellow counties have increased in population, with the red being the most and the yellow being the least on the increase side. All of the shades of blue are counties that have declined in population during that same time period, and we see Teller into that group. So from 2010 to 2014, tellers experienced a decline in population. When we talk about population change, there's two pieces that give us change. One, which is called natural increase, which is represented in the orange here, which is births minus deaths. The other piece is net migration, the ins minus the outs, and that's represented by the green. So we can see over time that our natural increase stays fairly constant. You know, it moves around a little bit, but wow, look at that net migration. It goes all over the place, and you'll say, oh, that kind of looks like a business cycle. Yes, that's what it really looks like, is a business cycle, because a lot of our migration is related to job growth. If we look at natural increase, that births minus deaths, again, red, orange, yellow are counties that have increases or have a positive natural increase, more births than deaths. The shades of blue are counties that have natural decline, meaning more deaths than births. And we can see that a lot of that southeast corner of the state, as well as the central mountains, are also in that pattern. Now, they're really getting very close to Teller. And we're going to talk more about that in terms of where you guys are in your population cycle. But it's something important to think about, that you've got two pieces. Then if we go to net migration, again, same concept, red, orange, yellow are those that had increases in or had positive net migration, and the shades of blue are those counties that had declines or had net out migration, and that's where Teller was sitting in that time period between 2010 and 2014. But in company with a lot of counties. 39 counties had net out migration during this time period. And that's pretty significant considering this is the recovery, right? And we're fourth fastest in the U.S. Yet we're seeing this concentration of population along the metro corridor, and I think that's something important for all of us to be thinking about. So if we look at Teller County's population change over time, we're looking at 1990 to 2013, we can see that it did increase significantly from 1990 through 2000. And that's really where, I mean, a little over 12,000 to up over 21,000 in that 10-year time period. And so, you know, definitely a period of fast growth. But since 2000, it's been, you know, a little slow, and then definitely very recently, very slow to flat growth that we've seen in the county. When we look at why you change, again, that natural increase versus net migration, natural increase here on the bottom, where you've had fairly solid natural increase, so more births than deaths, right around 100 a year, so 100 more births than deaths, except for over the last, you know, probably 6 or 7 years, where you dip behind that, below that 100, to even 1 year where you barely squeaked above zero in terms of natural increase. But look at that growth that you had in the 90s, and that was all in migration, people moving into the county. When we migrate people to the state, and this is really important to think about who you might be attracting to Teller, and then therefore to Woodland Park, Colorado as a whole net migrates in folks that are young. This is migration by age. This is age along the horizontal axis and total numbers along the vertical. And so we can see it's definitely concentrated in the, you know, kind of 20 to 32 age group. 18 to 32 is really our bread and butter of where we migrate a ton of people to the state. Very few people over the age 65. We're not a mecca like Arizona or Florida for attracting the 65 plus. But this is the state as a whole. We know every county is different, right? So Teller's net migration by age. So it's pretty funny. So we're going to say, so just for the people that might not be close enough to the screen, this is the zero axis, is right here. So we can see that you will bring, so primarily you do bring in some young adults, but all the way up through 65, even older, even, you know, up to 70. And therefore, even the young adults bring with them kids. So you migrate in kids, or have. This is looking at 2000 to 2010. But you definitely lose the young adults. And that's really common for places that don't have, universities in their counties. So, looking for the first job opportunity and or looking to, break out on their own or go to school. And so you have this solid net out migration from basically 18 to almost 30 years old. And that's an important thing to be thinking about in terms of your community, in terms of who do you attract and how do you attract them, and how do you keep them, and what kind of strategies you might want in the future. So if we look at Teller County by place, and we can focus on Woodland Park, but just over this time period from 2010 to 2013, you've had a decline of 163 people. That could be, an error term. Yes, sir?
Are you going to have these available on the website or some slides?
I'll talk with Sally and figure out the best way to do this. I can either give them to her or I can put them on my website and make it available for everyone that way. So we'll make sure that people here have access to all of this.
It would save a lot of writing.
Yes. Yeah. Don't worry about writing. So a couple pieces. One, the decline that I mentioned is 163. So that really could be an error term. It's not huge, but the point is you're flat. Okay? It's not an increase. It's a very flat. And if we look, Woodland Park is there at that same piece, about a negative 0.4%. Again, it's, when we look at totals, Woodland Park is, it's a third of the total population, with 2/3 in the unincorporated area, about within the remainder in the other municipalities. I peaked at the 14 numbers, and you're an increase for that year between 13 and 14. Your natural increase is around 22. So you had 22 more births than deaths, and your net in migration was about 120. So in your total, you're still from 2010 to 2014, you're still showing up as a negative. But just this one last year of 2013 to 14, you're showing up as a positive for both the county. And then we'll allocate that down to the place based on housing unit change. And so I don't know exactly where Woodland Park will fit, but I can imagine that it would be positive, since it was positive for the county. So let's talk about why population would change differently maybe in this area. One thing is to look at is your housing unit prices, because that's what people have to live in. If we look at Woodland Park, the median home value is about $241,000. Teller, it's about $226,000. So a little bit lower in Teller County than Woodland Park as a whole. And then if we look at your housing unit change, and this is where I'll encourage the county and all of the municipalities to make sure that they're submitting data to us on new permits. We're showing, slight increases in housing units for Teller County, about 136 housing units between 2010 and 2013. We're just working on our 2014. We're just beginning at our part. So I was talking with our estimates demographer, and we do have data in from unincorporated Teller County, but we don't have Woodland Park's in yet. So we definitely need to make sure that we get Woodland Park's new housing unit count for this last year. But you've got some interesting challenges. You've got a lot of your homes are second homes. A lot of people maybe in the metro area, they'll think of Summit County, or they'll think of Eagle as, areas that have a lot of second homes, and not realize places that, like Teller, also have that situation where basically what it's showing is in 2013 you had about 3,000 of the 12,000 housing units are vacant, but 67% of them are seasonal vacant. So they're basically seasonal housing units, people that use them for vacation units type of thing. So that's an important piece to always take into account when we're looking at your housing units, is to realize that a large share for the county, and then even for Woodland Park, you're showing up with 318 vacant housing units of the 3,200. and about 40% of them are seasonal units. They're ones that are vacation seasonal. So just keep that in mind with data and data related to vacancy, that it will bring in those seasonal units that really aren't available for rent or for purchase. They are being used as a seasonal unit. So any questions quickly on that? All right. So, yes, sir.
Could you comment on where the housing prices that you got out there compare with other areas in the state?
You know, I didn't bring a map on that one, but I will. So you're actually at a fairly high rate. You're at a little bit, you're right about state average, but a little high for state average. You're a little bit higher than counties and areas, especially to the west of you. So if, I don't have a map in front of me, but if we are looking at Chaffee, you're a little bit higher than there. So, but you're comparative for areas in Colorado Springs or in El Paso. I mean, they've got areas that are high cost as well as areas that are lower cost.
It seems to be in line.
It's not horrible, but the piece to take into account is the number of seasonal units that you guys have available, that are here. So you don't really have a lot of vacant units available. And it all depends on who you're trying to attract. If you're trying to get that 25-year-old that's just starting out, they're not going to be able to afford a $250,000 home. And that's your median. You know, so that means that there's about half above and half below, but it also takes into account those seasonal units. So, you know, we could do a better housing analysis with, you know, if you guys wanted, you know, to look at really what is available for incomes.
What does it take to be classified as vacant?
So what is, the question is, what is vacant? So it starts with the Census Bureau for Census 2010. If no one lives in that housing unit and is a full-time resident, then it's considered vacant.
For the whole year?
It's considered vacant for that whole year, and we start with that as the base. Then we move forward from Census 2010, and it becomes basically this housing unit population method to where we add new housing units based on information submitted by the county and by municipalities, as well as looking at the number of new people that have moved in based on migration and natural increase. We allocate those people to each housing unit based on a per household number that starts with Census 2010. So let's say you had a lot of people move in, but no new housing units built. Obviously, your vacancy rate would go down. You could have more people move in, new housing units move in, your vacancy rate stays the same. Or no housing units built, people move out, vacancy rate moves up.
I'm still confused. Is it vacant on a particular day of the year, or is that like the average?
So I would say it's considered an average annual, because we take our housing unit data.
Okay, so at any given time, we could say that 67% were vacant at any given moment.
So actually, I'll be clear. Your vacancy rate is 24% for Teller County.
24%.
Okay, basically 3,000 of the 12,000. But then of those, these 3,000 that are vacant, 67% of them are seasonal, meaning they're not really vacant, right? Because if it's your second home, if it was my second home, it's not vacant, right? It's not vacant available. It's vacant seasonal. But for the Census Bureau count, because it doesn't have a person in it, it's considered vacant. Does that make sense? Am I talking in circles? I'm sorry. Was there a question back? Yes, sir.
Well, but in the case of Teller County, then there would be 1,000 vacant units. At the time you came up with the 2,000 are seasonal, there are 1,000 that are vacant.
Yes.
So where are these places? Why aren't people living here?
The remaining 33% of the
3,000.
3,000, about 1,000.
About 1,000 of them, yes, at that point in time. So this was April of 2010. And I will also tell you that mountainous wooded areas are a challenge to count. They also might take into account a unit that is really no longer a unit that's available to be lived in. I mean, granted, they look to make sure it's got a roof and a door. I think that's their qualifications for habitable. But we know that this has happened, for example, like Park County has a similar problem in that what they counted as total housing units, you're like, not sure that would really count as a housing unit. So I think it's definitely worthwhile if there's questions and where you're like, really, there's no way that could be, that we take an honest look at your housing unit count to see what could be missing. And it is a point in time, so it was as of like April 1st, and they are vacant for rent and vacant for sale. And remember, you need a vacancy rate of about 5 to 6% at least to keep flows going. Because if you don't, have a flow, then you're not going to have people able to move around and stuff like that within a county, which is important. So a positive vacancy rate isn't really negative. It's not a negative thing. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So are you saying a vacant house could be a house for sale to move in?
Oh, absolutely. That's the traditional concept of a vacant housing unit is one that's empty, that's for sale or for rent, that does not have anybody in it currently. That is the traditional concept. The add-on is that it could be vacant. It's just my second home and I'm not there that weekend.
Could you repeat the questions before you answer?
Yeah, I'll work on that. I'm sorry about that. So that was his question, was what is vacant again? So that's what I was answering. All right. So taking all of that into account, where the U.S. is, where Colorado is, how we migrate people, this is Colorado's age distribution. And I only throw this in for comparison. So these are, again, ages along the bottom, and then I've got it color-coded for your generation. So if you are in the silent generation, if you were born between 28 and 45, you're in this light blue color. If you are a boomer, which I think a lot of folks in this county are, then you're purple. If you're a Gen Xer, then you're green. If you're a millennial, you're red. If you're next gen, which we might have one, I saw a younger gentleman here. He might be in the next gen. I don't know. Close. I bring this up because this is what we look at as the state. This is Teller. Okay, we're going to go back and forth. Colorado, Teller. So, you like purple. Purple's a good color for you. So I'll highlight a couple of things. One, this is in 2015. So we've got a bunch of the boomers have moved into the 65 plus. You've got some Gen X, very few millennials, except for those that are still at home. And then you can see a couple of things in terms of a drop in the kid population, which I think you guys have seen. A lot of folks at that 50 plus, very few people in the 30-year-old age group. But you've not always been this way. In 1990, all you had were 30-year-olds. So this is 1995, and look, you had all of these 30 to 50-year-olds, and then very few of these Gen X, because you lose that age group, those youngins. And so all you've done over time is age. And you're... How do you say that nicely? But I think it's really important to see this because in 1995, you guys did different things and you had a lot of babies. I mean, look, the max point here is at 250 right here. Basically, 300 was your max kid at about 9 years old. I mean, right now, you're below that, especially recently. You're under 5 is much lower.
Okay, is that saying that everybody that was here 20 years ago is still here, just 20 years older?
Absolutely. And that's what we do. We celebrate birthdays. And it's not that you're migrating in a lot of people over the age 65. You saw your migration by age. You get a little bit of a bump or closer to zero. But mostly it's just, our friends and family are just having birthdays and we just get older. But we haven't replaced. And that's going to affect you guys out into the future.
But isn't that consistent with what the baby boom population has done since the 60s? They've kind of migrated along the pipeline.
Absolutely. But look at the state. What did we do? We filled them in. We just haven't filled them in Teller. And you're not the only one. There's a lot of counties that are similar in terms of kind of a little mountainy, wooded, beautiful, outside of metro areas, attracted a lot of people in the 70s and 80s. They've stayed here forever. And the question is, what happens next? Because you age through some normal times, but now that you're at this point, a lot of these folks are going to want to retire. And they're going to probably want to retire in place. I mean, it's beautiful. Where's the next person going to come in and live and move into? Where's their replacement worker going to live? Do you want to grow? Do you not want to grow? Where are these people going to get services from? Do you have enough people able to work at, they say that folks over the age 65 spend a lot of their money in health services and eating out. Do you have enough of both of those? Both workers and places to keep them. Because you're actually a fairly wealthy group. And so trying to keep actually some of your benefit here is an important piece, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So I'm going to fly through a couple of pieces, but it's just to re-emphasize this aging piece. This is looking at Teller County, just the population change between 2000 and 2010. We can see that, so the dark blue is 2000, red is 2010. We can see declines in the under 9, declines in the under 18, a little bit of an increase in the 18 to 24, but decline in the 25 to 34, big decline in the 35 to 44, but increases in the 45 to 54 and 55 plus, significantly. It's not people moving in, it's you guys had celebrated birthdays during that time period. Why do we migrate people? Jobs. Okay, there's a huge correlation between jobs, which are the blue bars, and red, which is natural increase, or which is net migration. Now, remember, there's some things that affect you guys differently. You can easily migrate to or share a labor shed with Colorado Springs and El Paso and other areas. So you're also an area that's tightly correlated with other areas. If we look at the state, we're back to peak employment. Back in 2013, we reached that level. If we look at the state as a whole, all of the green counties are back to peak employment by 2013. We'll almost be done with the 2014 in another month. All of the red, pink, and white are counties that are not yet at peak employment. There are only 16 counties at peak employment in 2013. So it's really important to see what's going on around you. Now, you weren't back to peak employment, but El Paso County was. If we look at just Teller County over time, this is 2001 over here, 2003, then you had a big, and just remember that this is the scale is interesting. This is going from 9,250 to 10,250, so it's only 1,000 jobs in here. A fairly decent increase through 2007, then the recession hits, lose jobs, primarily based on, you're an amenity-driven area, so people come here when they've got disposable income. And when we had the recession, we had problems with disposable income. And so people weren't able to spend as much out in beautiful places. Right now, you're at about 93% of peak employment, actually declining recently, and flat to declining for 14 as well, for the county as a whole.
Do you mean unemployed or number
This
of
is
people employed, or
this is
percentage?
number of jobs.
Number of people who are employed.
So number of jobs.
Number of jobs.
These are jobs,
Okay.
not at all related to your labor force.
So how do you determine peak employment?
So our peak employment we picked as the top number, so the most recent highest level of employment, and then now down a bit.
So just to be clear, that would not include a person who lives in Teller but is employed in El Paso.
Absolutely not. This is only jobs in Teller County, which is a really good point. So the question, I am sorry, I keep forgetting. So the question is, what is this really? This is jobs. This is not people that live here and employment of people in Teller. It is just jobs located within the county boundaries. If we look at Teller in terms of peak employment, those industries that are above peak employment include mining, ag, admin and waste services, government, and arts barely squeaks by. Education is right at the flat line. Everything from utilities up is not at peak, is still below peak employment, with wholesale trade and manufacturing construction being at the lowest end. But if we look at jobs by industry, what's your number one employment area or employment industry? Accommodations, food service. Number one, followed by government and then retail trade, and then arts and then other services. So really your top four are really in service areas that can also be low service areas, which I'll show you a employment map in a minute.
We're still talking jobs here.
This is all based on jobs, not where people are employed, but the physical jobs in the county. You've got a fairly strong professional and business services. Those tend to be higher income jobs. There's mining, obviously, in the county. But you can kind of see where things are in terms of total jobs. If we compare Teller and Woodland Park, these are employment by industry by share. So, for example, accommodations and food services is about 15% of Teller's employment. It's about 16% of Woodland Park's employment. The other big one, so retail trade we saw was huge for Teller County, 21% for Woodland Park. I mean, it's very significant for Woodland Park. So you can kind of see where things are in terms of share and which one's stronger for the county versus the municipality. But professional and business services is right about 7-8% for both, which is good. That's a good solid one to think about strengthening. It tends to have low impact and higher incomes. So it's a good, nice, solid industry area to be looking at. Some of that will also be dependent upon broadband access. How are you guys in your broadband?
We're about ready to lease a contract for a plan,
Okay.
which we announced in the next few weeks.
Okay. So that's one of those key pieces is broadband access in terms of economic development. A lot of people think about broadband as, oh, great, I get to stream Netflix. It's like, no, it is common core industries. We're talking this one specifically, professional and business services, management of companies, real estate, finance are all completely integrated with broadband. Even just like an accountant, they really don't work on paper anymore. It's all, I know, imagine. It's all it's all web-based. It's all cloud-based. There was a hand.
I know many people who work at their home, work full-time jobs
Yep.
from home. Is that factored into your statistics, or do you have no way of capturing it?
So the question was, what about entrepreneur that's working from home?
Well, or even employed. There are many people who are just not
Oh,
employees.
so that's a good question. So there's two pieces. If you are a sole proprietor working from home, you don't typically show up in the unemployment insurance data records that all of our data is based on. So we have another method for coming up with that sole proprietor. I'm going to say that it's a good estimate. It's not perfect, but we bring that into the estimates for employment, and it's by industry. If you are working for another firm, but you are employed at home, you show up at the place of business. So let's say you are working for a firm in Denver, but you are actually working in your apartment or your home in Woodland Park. You show up in Denver's employment, not in Woodland Park's employment. So, and that's a key piece because we know in a community like this, that's so easy to do. You can easily be working for a company in another county. That was a really good question.
Is gaming under entertainment?
Gaming can show up both under entertainment and under accommodations, depending how co-located with a hotel it is. And so we know that Teller has lost some employment in that recently, yes. But only about, it was like, what, 160 is what we were showing? I don't know if you know. Okay. All right. Were there any other questions? All right, I'm going to get this. So if we look at your base industries, basically your economic drivers, what brings people here, what's going on. Biggest piece, tourism, 32%. Retirees, that's pretty easy to think about, right? You've got retirees here, they spend dollars, that creates jobs. So that's what we mean by retiree-based jobs. We've got traditional, and that includes manufacturing, government, then we've got mining, educational services, other regional services, and then we've got this thing called a commuter. You're like, really? Elizabeth, how does a commuter create a job? Easy. They can be that person that actually sits in their home and works for a firm in Colorado Springs, or they can really be working in Colorado Springs. Basically, what you're doing is you're bringing your dollars from where you're earning that are outside of the county, and you're bringing them back home, and you're spending them locally. And that is creating jobs in your community. So that's obviously a very significant piece of employment in your area. So this gives that explanation a little bit more about the relationship between jobs and commuters. The dark green circle, entire dark green circle, are jobs in Teller County. The light green circle are the workforce or the labor force in Teller County. Where the two intersect is where the worker and the resident actually are in the same place. So you've got a very small share. So we've got employed in the area but living outside. So you've got people that actually commute in to Teller and work. They come in from outside of the county and work, about 44% of them. And then you've got live in the area but employed outside. About 65% of your labor force leaves and works outside, maybe physically or just electronically. But I'm assuming that you see a lot of traffic going up and down. And I've been in it before. I've seen it. So that's Teller. Woodland Park is just as pretty. Same idea, fewer jobs than people, but less overlap. Now, this goes from the municipal boundary. So you could be right outside of that municipal boundary and be working in the town. But it's important to see just how big commuting is for both the county and the municipality. About 83% of the folks that live in Woodland Park do not work here, which is pretty significant. Now, this is only taking into account wage and salary jobs, not proprietor jobs, because this is just based on wage and salary data. If we look at your income distribution, first of all, median household income in Teller County is about $59,000. Woodland Park, it's about $61,000. Fairly high for the state. if we look at where you lie in terms of fairly comparable, with just a little bit higher in the higher income brackets for Woodland Park than Teller County as a whole. But you've got a pretty wide distribution, and remember, this is just based on income. So if you are a retiree living off of savings, you could be just fine and down here in the $10,000 range and living here beautifully well because you're living off of savings. So that's the only part that's hard, especially in a community like Teller and Woodland Park that has a lot of folks moving into that 65 plus, is that this might not really be a fair picture of the incomes in your community. In terms of looking at your forecast, I was showing that circle that gave the pie. These are jobs that are forecast. So again, if we look at tourism, regional services, what we see growing is tourism and retirees being the largest set of growth areas for the county. Now, the only reason we do that is that when we put our forecast together, we take a current picture of what you look like and the industries that you have and how those industries are forecast to grow for the state and for the nation. So if you currently don't have an industry, we're not going to be forecasting that to grow. Could you easily bring in that industry? Yes. And is it showing up here? No. So when we put together our forecast, it's really based on a set of assumptions of current day. And our current day was actually like October of 2014. So your current situation could be different today than it was, a year ago. And likewise, this precludes bringing in anything else that you might see as an emerging industry. Our population forecast, even though you've been flat, is...
What was a trustafarian?
What's a trustafarian? Somebody under the age of 65 that is independently wealthy, not having any earned income. So like a trust fund baby. So you do have some of those in the county, that are just, independently wealthy under the age 65 that are not showing up in the earned income category. I'm sorry, I should have explained that. And then we've got public assistance is the orange. And then I think we hit the rest of those. Teller County, we are forecasting an increase in population, even though it's been flat lately. And we're willing to talk about it. If you think no, or if you think, no, it should be bigger, we should talk. So we're forecasting an increase, from a little under 25,000 to a little under 30,000 by 2025. And that's pretty aggressive for this time period where we might need to do a little bit of adjusting. We have to admit we were excited that we saw that there was an increase of the 120 between 13 and 14. We were hoping that it was not another year of decline. But I can estimate that we're probably going to bring that down a little bit from last year unless something big comes in. Like we were waiting for the religious school was going to, I think they were going to build dorms. And so that was going to increase numbers of potential population as well. So we'll talk, and the county's been really good at submitting information, so we can adjust that. Yes?
With this reference, I'm stuck on that 83% of people that live in Woodland Park do not work in Woodland Park. Is that
correct?
Okay. Of those, are they all employed, or are some of those retired? What is that?
So those only included people that were in the labor force. So they're real people working. They're not retirees, and they're not unemployed just hanging out.
One thing that, because of our high commuter numbers, so that obviously says we're commuters. We're either
yes.
working in the Springs or Western Keller County or wherever. The distinction of employment in El Paso County obviously will have a huge impact.
Yes.
Moving forward too. So
absolutely.
In the grand scheme of things, are you also looking in a model what's happening
Yes. So the question was, I think everybody could hear, but how does El Paso affect Teller? And when we model you guys, we model you and Teller and Park actually all together as one region, which is a benefit and a drawback because you guys don't have the same industry mix. So we'll force things to grow sometimes that don't really exist strongly here, but because they're increasing in El Paso, they'll increase here. So we have to be really, really careful with our Teller forecast. We have to do some double and triple checks to make sure nothing looks too squirrely on it. But that's a really good point. So when we're forecasting change for the county, basically we are forecasting increases in this younger population. And I just wanted to bring this one up because we know that not everybody works here. We know that there's a lot of commuters. But we know that a lot of people are going to be leaving the labor force and that you're going to need actually young people here for jobs. So that's why we are showing this increase in especially the 30 to 39-year-olds. But then you can see this big increase in the 70 plus. And this decline in the 50 to 59-year-olds primarily because they've aged out. They've already aged into the higher age groups. But I think that that's an important assumption to understand with our forecast. We're forecasting growth for the state as a whole, increasing from about 5.3 to 7.8, with most of it along the Front Range. Slight increases in the western slope, slight increases in the Central Mountains and San Luis Valley. But most of that growth, as you've seen, along the Front Range, which will affect growth in Teller County as well because of your tight correlation with El Paso County. If we look just by county, we can see, again, most of it along the Front Range with very low growth in surrounding areas. Our growth scenario, again, it was back on that previous page, increasing by about 5,000, 7,000 people by 2025. Some of the big questions, though, are really based on housing units. One of the problems that Colorado has is that it's an expensive place to be, so will it have the same kind of growth that we've had in the past? If we look at the state, the darkest color reds are median home prices above $260,000. If you look across the U.S. and against our competing states like Texas and Georgia, we're a really high-cost place. And that's an important factor to take into account. Will we be able to attract and retain people coming to the state? Because there are cheaper places to live. If we then look within the state as a whole, and this gets back to, I think you had a question on median home values around the area. Darkest color is above 300,000, then we've got the 225 to 300, and we can see that Teller is in that more expensive range. But Park is in there, Chaffee's there, more than El Paso, but less than Douglas, less than Elbert. So it all just depends on your perspective, I think. But you are a higher cost area. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the strong message in what you're saying is that we need more affordable housing.
Absolutely. So the question is here, so the comment about affordable housing, yes. For the state as a whole, we need affordable housing. For the county, it's going to be important, especially if you're looking at trying to bring in folks at younger age groups. I mean, that's one of the biggest problems that we've had is that folks really between the 20 and 30-year-olds have been or underemployed for the last decade. And so they haven't made the gains that we did when we were that age. And so they're operating at a much lower, it's interesting. Baby boomers were well educated, and then the baby bust generation or Gen X, well educated. Millennials, even higher educational attainment, but lower incomes. If we look at that same age group, the 25 to 34-year-olds, for each generation, the boomers had a certain number, then the Gen X was higher, millennials lower. So they're starting off on a lower foot. And so if we want to be able to bring them in, and we're going to need them in the labor force, we're going to need them in our community, we need to have a place for them to live, which is really important. And I mean, I live in Denver, and that's the number one issue that we're trying to face in Denver.
Have you tried to come up with a median home value factoring out second homes?
No,
I
I wish.
think, like for Eagle County and Pitkin, it would be a huge difference.
Absolutely, but one of the problems with Teller, for example, and Pitkin Eagle, their town manager, their school teacher, their folks that live and work in the community moved there 2 decades ago. They try and sell their housing unit now, it's going into the second home market. It's not going to go into the next county manager or whoever else that lives and works there, because it's appreciated so much in value that only a second home person could afford it, not a regular worker.
It seems to me that we had an interesting example of drawing a conclusion from the statistics that are not in the statistic. Somebody made the statement that this screen just says that we need more affordable housing. Well, it doesn't say that at all. It simply says
that you've got a high median home value.
A higher median home price in this location versus that location. It doesn't say anything about what you need. You could just as easily say we need higher priced homes in Kit Carson County. That would be just as logical a conclusion. So I would emphasize we shouldn't make conclusions about these data that are not in the data.
So I think you bring up a good point on that, only in that a more detailed housing analysis should be done. But if you remember back what I was talking about, the number one jobs in your community, they are retail, they're service, they are at the lower end of the income spectrum. So if you're trying to pair, and I should have brought a slide, and it would have been really good because they do show percent paying over 30% of income, but I only could do so many pictures. But you'll show for the jobs that you have in the community, your housing prices are too high for somebody, for example, in retail to afford.
That would be true looking forward. I mean, you could argue that they're exactly right because everybody seems to have a home. But maybe more logically, you could say if you want to attract more low-income people, then you should have lower-priced housing.
In that part I can't.
Well, that's what it does.
Well, and when you're, what's low income? What's affordable?
It's relatively lower income.
So, it all, if you want folks that live here or work here to be able to live here, then that's something to look at. Yeah.
Question. You showed a shortage, I'll say, of fewer people in the 20 to 30, 30 to 40 age group cannot afford to live here. I don't care whether you call it affordable housing or something else. Is there a question about the sustainability of Woodland Park? If that worsens?
So I'll just say that there are fewer 30 to 40 or 20 to 40-year-olds. I won't say why they're not here because I didn't ask them. It could be housing. It could be job opportunities. It could be environment. It could be access to childcare. It could be any number of things that young adults are looking for in a community to live in. I don't know all of those pieces here. You guys would know that better. But you bring up the most important piece, which I think is long-term sustainability. If all goes well, all that big group in the 65 plus are going to continue having birthdays and they're going to age through the spectrum. And then what we say is make that ultimate out-migration. And you've got a lot of folks in that age group, and if you don't replace them, you will be one of those counties that have more deaths than births. And a lot of counties are looking at how do they move forward with that. How do they afford their water systems? Water systems are breaking down and they're having to put new ones in, yet their population's declining. How do they put that together? So I think that these are good discussions for the county and the municipality to be having in looking at that long run sustainability, because guaranteed you're going to start having a lot more deaths than births in, give it 10 to 15 years. You saw the numbers. You've got a lot more people over 65 than you do under 5. And so, just math makes it work that way. I know I'm over time, but I just want to hit a couple of quick things. All right, we know that we're getting old, and we're getting old fast. And it's primarily just from aging for the state as a whole. What's happening in Teller is happening in El Paso. It's happening in metro areas. It's happening even in Douglas County, where we're aging very quickly, and we need to look at how we manage it. And increasing from about 555,000 to 1.2 million people in the state, but we're still going to be relatively young as a state because we migrate young people to the state. This just shows the difference in time period between 1990, 2010, and 2030 by age. And we can see where we grew. Between 1990 and 2010, we increased a lot of population in that 45 to 64-year-old age group. And that happened here as well. We did not increase a lot in the 65, but we also gained some kids. Between 2010 and 2030, we're going to see a lot of growth in that 65 plus, very little growth in that 50 to 65. Very little growth, because that's the part of the baby bust, and it's going to impact Teller as well, and then growth at the young end. So we're going to have dealing with both aging and young people at the same time, because we need to bring in young people to help replace all of the jobs that these people are giving up. Our fastest growing time period is this decade between 2010 and 2020, increasing by 61%. How fast is the state growing? Do you remember? 1.5%. Our 65 plus is increasing by 6% per year. So 4 times as fast as the state as a whole. If we look at it by Teller's population, between 2010 and 2020, increasing from about 2,200 to over 4,000. We're halfway there. Just the 65 to 74-year-olds. Fastest growing time period, and then it stays relatively flat for the 65 to 74-year-olds. Then we have the growth for the 75 to 84-year-olds. And that's the age group that we tend to see demand for more services. So that's going to be a big change for the county. What kind of transportation services do you have? What other kind of aging services do you have in the county? And then on the 85 plus, really not happening until closer to 2040. There's a lot of issues related to aging.
Well, maybe you'll talk about it in housing. Last time you were here, you had some data or commentary about what the baby boom generation is looking for in terms of housing and seniors generally.
Yes, so I'm going to hit a little bit on that, but we can talk a little bit about that more. But these are the big issues. It's a numbers issues. It's an economic driver. Again, what did I say? Where do the 65 plus spend their dollars? High end and low end service. So you're going to have a lot of those folks in town creating demand for those jobs. Do you have the housing services? And if you don't want the housing services for them, do you have the commuting capacity for them? Because if they're not living here, then they're driving here. Or if they're not driving here, then you don't have the service. If you don't have the service, can you retain your 65 plus? There's a lot of communities like Eagle and Summit that are looking at that. How do they retain their 65 plus? Because they've got money and they spend their dollars locally. How do you keep them in your community? And you're going to need those services. And in terms of housing services, baby boomers, man, how many of you are out there? You're a crazy sort. You're going to want a bunch of different things. Most of you are going to actually age in place. Only about 20% move into another facility. But then there is a group of 20% that do. And some of them are going to want flat, no stairs. Because what have you guys been doing? You've been hiking, biking, fishing, skiing. You've gone through 1 hit, maybe 2, maybe on a knee. So you're wanting a flat, accessible surface maybe. Others of you are fine, and you're not going to need any additional services. And we know that people have aged well over time and need fewer services. But the point is that there's going to be a lot more people wanting a lot more different types of things. The whole concept of retirement village, baby boomers really haven't bought into that 100%. There's some people that see that that's okay and that's what they want to do, but we're not seeing that movement that we've seen in the past. Yes, some will move there, but a lot will age in place. Income impacts, health, disabilities, transportation, I think is potentially a big concern here. I don't know what kind of transportation services there are. And then the impacts on public finance. Labor force is another big issue. About 37% of our labor force, and I'm going to venture it's higher in Woodland Park and Teller, are in the baby boomers and will be aging out. About 1 million people aging out of the labor force over the next 20 years. And that's going to create incredible demands, and it's not just in Teller. It's in El Paso, it's in Park, it's in Denver, it's in Jefferson. So everybody's going to be competing for the best and the brightest. And that's who you've got working in your community now. And everybody's going to be looking to replace, when you age out, they're looking for replacement, trying to find the best and the brightest. A huge impact, especially on education, health, utilities, mining, government, industries that have the oldest aged workers currently. And the labor force is going to be very constrained. So again, in areas like Teller that have this lack of population, Delta County is another one, that have a lack of population, what I would say kind of that mid-age of 30 to 40-year-olds, what do you have to bring them to your community to come in for those jobs? Do you have the housing services? Do you have other amenities? Do you have daycare services that can attract people into that age group? Because it is going to be very competitive to bring people in. Colorado's not the only one. I mean, we're competing with the U.S. and the world for the best and the brightest. There's fewer Gen Xers, so there's just even fewer people coming in behind the boomers as they leave. And we've had this high and underemployment for the 18 to 34-year-olds. So again, coming up with the best and the brightest to fill these skills that people are going to be vacating, I think is going to be a challenge. Public finance, I'm just going to bring it up very quickly since it's mostly city and county folk here, on how you might see impacts in your community. From between 1990 and 2010, the fastest growing age group was the 45 to 64-year-olds. And tell me something about 45 to 64-year-olds. Highest earning, highest spending on goods, highest property tax paying. We're not seeing that age group grow. We're seeing actual declines in that age group. What we are seeing is a growth in that older age group. And so we had this demographic dividend from 1990 to 2010 with just a huge group of people in the state growing and earning and spending a lot of money. So we're going to see some downward pressure on income tax, downward pressure on sales tax, because they're not buying goods anymore. They've done buying stuff, now they want to unstuff. They're going to be spending most of their income on services. And our services taxed? So, what will that mean to your community services? So something to be thinking about, especially with your age group. Downward pressure potentially even on property tax, depending on what you qualify for and if people downsize. At the same time, demand for health services increasing, Medicaid demand increasing. So we're definitely going to be going through a transition in terms of public finance. And this is just another graph showing that, which we don't need to really talk about. Because I know I love graphs. Nobody else likes them as much as I do. So just to kind of tie things up and to think about for your communities, can we compete for the best and the brightest? Do we have what it takes to attract and retain? And we're not saying that they all have to be engineers or rocket scientists, but they have to be the best at whatever they do. And can we attract them? Let's say you're aging, or let's say your parent is aging here and they need health services. You want the best and brightest for them, right? Can we attract them here? Can we manage the growth in high-end and low-end service jobs, this continued bifurcation in our economy? The disparate growth across the state is something for the state to be looking at, and how does the state look at things differently, like access to broadband, because that's huge, is that access to broadband. And then are we really set to cope with opportunities and challenges of an aging population? A lot of your folks are at the young end of the aging. Just wait for another 10 to 15 years, and it could be more of a challenge. And then, I think as John brought up, how do we really deal with kind of the long-run viable growth with an aging population and that serious saddle, from basically 20 to 40. So with that, what other questions do you have? Anything? You're like, all right, Elizabeth, you talk for an hour and 15, I'm done.
I think great discussion, great presentation. And on behalf of the city, I'd like to give Elizabeth a Woodland Park pin.
Awesome.
A small token.
I don't have one. So definitely follow up with me if people have questions, comments, suggestions, input. We want, this is obviously, it's not, granted it's for me, I have fun playing with it, but it's really more for you guys, and if it's not hitting the point, I need to know. If you don't have the data right, I need to know.
The best way to access this presentation, what we'll do is put a link on our city website and have the presentation embedded into the website so that you'll be able to access it. And we'll get that done by tomorrow afternoon.
Great. You mentioned the Bible college is one of the local factors that you forecast, increase in population. Is there any other factors you can think of? Because all the other charts seem to say that we're going to be decreasing.
Right. So, things have been flat. We do forecast an increase in the population. It's not all the Bible college. They're not going to come up with 5,000, we don't think, with it by 2025. We grow if you saw, we're basically tourism and age-related are the industry areas that we're forecasting to grow. But it could be that your economic development group has plans to bring in X industry or X whatever, and that's not in our plan. But we think that still there's going to be a lot of demand for a community that is outside of a big metro area like El Paso.
So providing supporting services for the industries.
Correct. Will be the industries.
And we're going to see an increase in housing with the apartments coming online. So we think that we'll be able to capture those folks that are currently commuting up the pass to work here. Now they can live here in an apartment.
All right.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for attending. Yeah.
Great job.
Always like